Hi everyone, my name is Nicolas Noé and I work as an IT expert for the Belgian Biodiversity platform, which acts as the Belgian GBIF node based in Brussels. So in this video we will learn how to publish biodiversity data in the GBIF network using a tool called the IPT. This video is a practical demonstration. It's like a tutorial you can follow yourself step by step, and it will cover the whole process. I mean, we will start with a very basic biodiversity data stored in an Excel file there, and we will end up with data published in the GBIF portal. So yeah, this file, this occurrence file, should look familiar to all of you. You have a few rows, well, only 7 here, but the process is just the same if you had thousands of records, and for each you have a locality, you have some taxonomic information like the scientific name, the genus. You have a collector, the name of the person who collected it on the field. You have a latitude, longitude of where the occurrence was collected, and you have a date. So it should look familiar to most of you. I think it's quite common in any biodiversity lab to have those kind of data everywhere. And once published, it will be available in the GBIF network to anyone to analyze or use. So if you're not really familiar with the GBIF network, we will have a look at published data, so you can basically know what we'll have in the hand. This is the main GBIF website. You can see that there is a huge amount of occurrence data published. You can see that all that comes from 15,000 datasets, more or less. What we will do here is just publish one more of those datasets and to add our data to this global pool. Yeah. Let's have a look at the datasets. Imagine we have published a dataset called African rodentia. After publication, it will be searchable here on the GBIF website. Once you select it, you have some metadata, like describing what is data about. You have automatically generated maps, for example, with a timeline, those kind of things. And more importantly, you can see the 90,000 occurrences that are making these data sets. You can browse them here. You can see the details about a specific one, locality, location. Sometimes you have a map, you can have a picture, you can have many things about that. It's not the case for that. And if you really want to use them for your resource, you can simply download those occurrences and use them in your preferred software. So yeah, that's what we'll do. We start with this kind of Excel sheet and we end up with published data on the GBIF network like that. This is a first tutorial on this topic. We can call it basic publishing, and we will cover the most important stuff so you can start publishing occurrence data or other source of biodiversity data. But of course there will be a second tutorial focusing on more complex cases, like for example publishing multimedia stuff, publishing sample-based data, dealing with errors in the original dataset, all that. The second tutorial will take place during the GBIF Nodes training event that will happen in Madagascar in early October 2015, in the same along the GBIF governing board GB22 that will take place. I guess most people in the GBIF community knows about this event. If this training event will focus on advanced topics, which means that the basic publishing, so basically what we will do here, will be supposed to be known. So if you're not publishing biodiversity data with the IPT, and if you're not totally comfortable with those steps, please follow this tutorial and ask questions and practice and all you need to feel comfortable, because we will start the second part where that first tutorial finished. So it will be difficult to follow if not this level, and if you're not able to do basic publishing. Yeah, if you have any issue, if you have any comment, if you have any question, please do ask. Let's discuss that. I think the best place to do it is on the GBIF community site. There are section opened about this training event related to GB22, and yeah, we can really all exchange together, and I'd be really happy to help you there and to answer any comment or question. You can find the address of the community site here, or alternatively, if you just want to ask me something privately, you can send me an email to the email address that is displayed too. So yeah, I think that's it. So before starting, we will review what we will need. We need two things. We need data to publish, of course. I already showed you this sample dataset, which is in an XML file. That's the data we will publish, and we need a tool to publish that. That tool is called the IPT, or Integrated Publishing Toolkit. It's the preferred way to publish biodiversity data at GBIF. There are others, but it's not interesting here. Yeah, it's an open source piece of software. You can find its page here. This is like a server piece of software, which means it's not like a desktop application you can just install on your laptop and play with it. At least for production use, you can. It's possible to install it on a simple laptop or desktop computer for testing purposes. But once you really want to publish real data to GBIF, you will need to have the IPT installed on a server, and so you will need someone who have system administration capabilities to help you do that. So to start this tutorial, we will need one instance of this IPT. So you will need either to install it yourself. For the tutorial, you can really do it on a laptop, on an Apple laptop, for example. We will not cover the installation of the IPT here, but you will find in the following link that you see now on the screen, you will find an excellent tutorial on the subject by Kyle Brack, which is the IPT team leader, that covers that. If you don't, or if you cannot install it yourself, you will need to have access to an IPT instance running on someone else's servers. It's something quite common in the GBIF network that sometimes happens. For example, if a country or a GBIF node or a GBIF provider has internet connectivity issues or electricity issues that cannot guarantee a connection that is up all the time, that another country with better infrastructure and conditions can install an IPT on behalf of this node or institution. So that's it, and here we will use a test IPT instance that is provided by the GBIF secretariat itself. I think that's it, so we can now start directly publishing data. So I will now connect to my IPT instance here. So this IPT is provided by the GBIF Secretariat itself. It's a test mode IPT, it's an instance. So what means by test mode is that we can safely play with it, publish some data, and it will not, I'd say, pollute the main GBIF portal and the main network. It's designed to do exactly the kind of things that we're doing, like training or testing stuff. So first things first, I will connect to this IPT using the credentials that I have received. Okay, I can see that I am now connected here. So first thing, we can see that the IPT is allowed to host multiple resources, multiple datasets. So with one single IPT instance, you can publish several datasets for several organizations or institutions if you want. And you can see exactly that here, because once we connect to this IPT, before publishing anything, we can see that there are already 4 published resources that are linked to different organizations. Test Organization 1, Test Organization 1, Test Organization Jenkins, that thing. So yeah, we have to know that the IPT is quite flexible, and that you can imagine having a single instance in an institution, but that allows publishing for other institutions and things like that. And that's exactly what we do in Belgium, for example. Some of our institutions, museum, data providers, have their own IPT instance, and they manage and they publish their data through this instance. But some lacks the capacity or lacks the infrastructure for that. And then we, as the Belgian GBIF node, we also provide our own IPT instance, and we can use it to publish datasets for other institutions on their behalf, and attribute the dataset, and the attribution is respected. So we connect, we can see there are those 4 datasets already, and we want to add one more. That's the point of this tutorial. So first I will click on Manage Resources, and on Manage Resources I have here a form that allows me to create a new resource or create a new dataset. We can see a few things in this form. We need a short name, we need a type for the dataset, and we can load a resource to add it automatically if we want. So we'll see those 3 things in sequence. First, we have to give a short name, which is like an identifier for our datasets. A good short name, for a good short name, you need 2 things. You need to respect the syntax, because this short name is sometimes used as a web address, and so it cannot handle every character, for example. There are those technical limitations. So we can click here and see the help, and it says please only use alphanumeric characters, hyphens or underscores. So we have to respect those technical limitations, that's the first thing. And the second thing is that when you name things and datasets, for example, in the GBIF network, it's quite important to be specific. Because you have to think that your data will end up in a global pool with a lot of different datasets from the whole planet, and so maybe in your lab saying that the dataset is the collection of fish is good because you know what the collection of fish is. But once put in a global system like that, collection of fish is not really clear, and you will have hundreds of different collection of fishes. So what you should do is give a very specific data set. For example, here I have a fish data set, the one we will work with. I will not say something like fishes, that would be a bit too generic, but something like brackish water fishes collection from the University of Brussels, brackish water fishes ULB. It seems a good short name because it's quite specific, and I only use allowed characters, so that one will be good. And then optionally we have to select a data type. It's optional, but I strongly recommend it to you. So we have to select between occurrence, checklist, sampling event, metadata only, or other. It's really important at this step that you choose the right data type, because if you try to publish a data set with the wrong data type for your data, it will become very messy and very difficult. So I think it's the first one of the first and one of the most important decisions you have to make when you're publishing data is choosing the right dataset type and select it here. So I suspect most of you understand quite well those terms, but I'd like to take some time to discuss them a bit more in detail, just to make sure that you have better guidelines to choose the right data type for your datasets. The most common type is occurrences, and if you go to the GBIF portal, you will see that most GBIF mediated data is occurrences. What we hear by occurrences is something where each row, or the central row, the central entity in your data set, if you want, you can take it like a row like that. Where each row describe an individual living organism, and basically occurrence data most of the time looks like that individual organism with that scientific name was found at that place at this time. That's really the core, I'd say, of what an occurrence is. You can have, of course, additional attributes like a picture of the specimen. You can have a collector name if the specimen was collected and bring back to a museum, things like that. But all those are like attributes of a given specimen that appeared at some point in time and at some given place. That's basically what we have in this sample datasets. You can see that the fields are more or less are really similar to what I just described. So first type, occurrence. The central entity, the central line, the central thing that we're describing is an individual organism. A second type is a checklist. If you think of a checklist dataset, it's a bit different, because in that case, here I still have my occurrence dataset. In the case of a checklist, each row, each entity is describing more like a taxonomic entity that a given organism. And attributes you can have for such a taxonomic entity are, for example, a parent entity. You can say that a species is part of a genus that appear on different line. You can have the status like synonym or accepted name, or those kind of things. A checklist, for example, can also be the list of all species known for a country or for a specific natural reserve or things like that. But if you look at rows in a checklist dataset, you will really see that the different fields, the different columns are like attribute of more the taxonomic concepts than a specific specimen, and than that compared to an occurrence. For example, here in my original dataset, you can see that there is a collector. I can see that this person has collected this specimen. That's really should push you in the occurrence direction, because if this row was describing a species in general, you cannot bring a species to the lab, and you cannot collect a species. You can just collect an occurrence, an individual organism that is part of this species. And yeah, so hope you can see the main difference between those two types. Sometimes the line is not that strong, and you have if you have a lot of columns saying a lot of different things about the data, you can have in the same row like specimen level information as well as species level information. It can be a bit difficult to assess, but in any case, you will, once you publish it, you will have to choose if you publish it with the specimen as the core entity, or with the species or the taxonomic entity as the main entities, and that's something important. So we've seen what an occurrence dataset is, what a checklist dataset is. Sampling event, this is quite new, and this will be covered extensively in the second part of this tutorial during the training nodes training event in Madagascar. This allows you to publish sample-based data, and that's quite new in the GBIF network. We'll talk about it later. Metadata only. This is something different. Metadata, in fact, is data about data. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you look at a dataset on the GBIF network, this is some published data through another IPT instance, and you can see here the metadata of these datasets. The data itself will be the different rows, the different occurrences, for example, containing the information. The metadata is some human understandable description of this, like here. Here you can find like an abstract describing what is this dataset, where it's coming from. You can have an image or a logo illustrating it. You have a publishing date that gives you an idea if the data is recent or not. You can have contact persons if you're using this data and you find like something that looks like an error, or you have a question, or you want more precision and you want to contact the scientists that publish the dataset. You can also find this information in the metadata of the datasets. So this is metadata. This is describing the dataset and giving context to its users. So, and we can see here that the type can be metadata only datasets. Why metadata only? In fact, GBIF and the IPT will require you to enter some metadata about anything that you publish. Any dataset, it can be occurrence, it can be checklist, it will ask you for metadata. So you publish your data, but you also give information to its users to understand it and to use it as good as possible. So an occurrence dataset will have occurrence data plus metadata. A checklist will have checklist data plus metadata. So a metadata only dataset does not contain data actually. It only contains the metadata. So it's just describing like here some collection, for example, or some dataset that is not currently published at GBIF. You can ask the point to that, but you can find easily some examples. For example, maybe you want to advertise and to show on the GBIF network that you have an important data set, and that you're willing to publish it later, but the data is not ready because you have to do some curation work on it, for example. At least you can already push it to the network and say, okay, this is what we have. This person is in charge. We will publish that amount of occurrences. You can contact us if you have questions or if you want a sample of the data to start working on it. But for now, no data, only metadata. So that's one of the cases where you want to publish a metadata only data sets. But most of the time you will publish occurrence, checklist or sampling event, data, and you will have metadata too. Order, I'm not totally sure at this step why it is used, so we will not talk too much about it. So here I take back my original dataset, my fish dataset. I choose a correct chart name, and I identified that it really looks like an occurrence type dataset. So choose a name, and I set the occurrence type dataset. And I'm ready to click create to create the new resource in this IPT. Just one small remark here. You can see here that you have a third field which allows you to upload an existing resource. This is to be done if, for example, you published a resource with one IPT instance and you want to move it to another, and you don't want to redo all this configuration again. You can export it from one IPT and load it automatically here. But that's not what we will do, because we're not starting for an existing resource in an IPT format. We're just starting with an Excel sheet, so we don't have anything to give at this step. We just give a name, we give a type, and we click create to create this new resource in my IPT instance. So after creating this resource in the IPT, we finally arrive on this resource overview page. This is the main page when we will configure all that's needed about our datasets. So we will quickly have an overview on each different section here, and then we will dig into each one in order and with more details. First, we can see a title. We can see that this is the overview, the resource overview pages for our dataset that is called brackish water fishes ULB, the short name we selected previously. The first section is source data. Source data allows basically to connect the IPT with the source of data itself, which means in that case it's this Excel file. So we will basically link them and tell the IPT the data you want to use is coming from this file. There are more advanced options like connecting to a database that will not be part of this tutorial. The next section, Darwin Core mappings, is getting just a bit further in the same direction. It is, once we gave the IPT this file, it is giving them more information about how to understand it. Because if you see various files containing occurrence from various researchers, various labs, you will have small differences, and you have to give a few hints to the IPT so you can really understand what happens in which column, for example. Metadata, basically it's where we will fill the metadata that describes our data sets, and that helps, that will ultimately help users to understand it. So if you remember these kind of data sets, this kind of metadata for the Belgian ANTS database dataset, that's really the kind of things that we will configure in this metadata section. Then published version will allow to, well, The name is not really well chosen in my opinion here, because you will not publish directly in the GBIF there. You will create a file that can be shared and that can itself be published at GBIF later. But clicking on publish here will not make data immediately available in the network, but it's the first step to do it. It's creating the file, and then later in the next section we will configure how we want to share the file. Here the resource is private, which means that nobody has access to our dataset. We can make it public to give it access to the world basically, but you still have to know the address of the IPT and that this resource exists. And then if we want it referenced in the GBIF portal, so it really appears and it is searchable and things like that, there will be a third state which is registered, and where we really will attach the file that we generated here. We will attach it to the GBIF network with this section. And then resource managers basically allows different people to administer this resource. If you are in a complex configuration, when you have several data curators that should be able to edit metadata or publish a duration, you can configure that here. Yeah, so that's for the overview of this very important manage resource pages. Now we will dig in each section. The first section of interest here is the source data section, and it's basically to tell the IPT this is where you will load data from. You can see there are two buttons for two different options. You can either give the IPT a file, like a CSV file or an Excel file containing your data, or you can connect it directly to some database server like MySQL or Oracle if you want. But that's not our option here. It's a bit more advanced use. We will just connect it to a file, and this is this file, basic occurrences dataset IXLSX, which is our Excel file containing our occurrences. So I click on the choose file button. I select this Excel sheet in my computer, click open, and then I can say add, just to say to the IPT, okay, I want to add this source of data as a source of data for this dataset. I click on add, and I arrive on a different page that allows me to configure more in detail the source data. So what we can see here is that you have a few different settings that you can configure for the source data, and you have like a diagnostic section here, which is quite helpful. It already tells you that he analyzed the file the first time. It tells you that this file is readable, so good thing. And then it has 11 columns of data. And you have this small eye icon, and if you click on it, you can have a quick preview of how the IPT understands your file, and this is extremely helpful. Click on it. I can see that indeed, if I compare to the original file, it seems that all columns are taken into account. It seems he understood it well. There's no garbage data. All columns are there, from the first one, ID, to the last, longitude. So it seems quite good. The IPT was able to figure out how our file works, basically. But I can see something a bit strange, is that if you see here on the IPT, you can see that the first displayed row is like the column names, and the IPT just put some automatic name like column 1, column 2, etc. And then after this column name you have the actual data. And what happens is that in our file here, in our Excel file, on the first line it is title for the rows, ID, locality, genus. It's not real data, it's just a title. And it seems the IPT hasn't taken that into account. And so if you publish this data, it will publish one occurrence that will have genus as a genus, family as a family, locality as a locality. That's not correct. We have to tell the IPT to skip this column and that to skip this row, sorry, and that this first row is in fact not data but a header or title, column titles. So I can leave the preview, and I see here number of header rows, which is set to 0, and this parameter is done exactly to do that. It just says the IPT, let's skip this number of row because they are considered as header, and so they are not part of the data themselves. And here I can see that I have just one row containing header, so I will put number 1 here. And now I'd like to know if it works better or not. So what I can do is click Analyze, so the IPT will reanalyze the file using the settings I just changed. And then I can click again on the preview icon, and I can see that the first title columns is really taken as a title and doesn't appear in the data itself. So I can see that it has been correctly interpreted by the IPT. So I've just configured my source to have something that looks perfect now. You have all columns, all lines, and the titles are really taken as titles. So that seems good. We have other options in this source data page, like if you use different sheets here for the IPT. If you, for example, have several sheets with different data, you can choose the one that you use. But here I only have one here. It's called occurrence. So yeah, that's those options are really related to the source data and the way to interpret the source data. So if you upload a different file, like a CSV file instead of an Excel file, or if you connect to a database, you will have different settings for this section. But basically the process is always the same. Once you are able to click Analyze and to check in the preview that the IPT can really access your data correctly, you can then click on Save, so all those settings are saved and the source data is configured. So now that we've, in the source data, already told the IPT where to find our data, we've connected it to our Excel file, we will now fill the Darwin Core mappings section. This is like the bigger and most important step of the whole process. So I'll explain a bit why it's important in just a minute. First, you see there's a list where you have to choose which core you want, and basically you can think of it as something that is linked to the dataset type that we've chosen when we created the datasets. So for an occurrence dataset, we will select occurrence, Darwin Core occurrence core. That's simply that. For a checklist, you would select taxon and event for sample-based data. So we can now click on Add, and then we have to select the source data we want to map. Here that's quite easy because we only have one, but in some advanced cases you could imagine integrating into the IPT data coming from different Excel files, for example, and in that case that really makes sense. Here we just get the choice that's already there and click on Save, and we are now on the big very long mapping page that I'll explain in detail. So what is this step and why is it necessary? In fact, the role of this mapping step is to tell exactly the IPT how to interpret our data that's coming from this file, and mainly it is to tell it which field is in which column. This is necessary because the format of the initial files you will connect to the IPT is always a bit different. It always looks similar, but Here we can see that our scientific name is in the 5th column, and the name of the column is scientific name. But you could very well imagine that another scientist will, or another data set, it will be stored in the 1st column, and maybe there will be no title to identify the column, because the guy say, okay, this really seems like the scientific name, I don't need a header to remember that. And maybe a third one will store it in the database, where the concept of column order doesn't really apply anymore. So, and the IPT of course needs to know exactly where to find things, because once everything is in the global portal, if you're looking for a scientific name, it has to look in the right column for every dataset. So we really have to tell him, okay, this is the place where you'll find the scientific name, this is the place where you'll find the collector name, and so on and so on. How does that work? IPT and GBIF will provide you a list of terms that are here on this page. These are called Darwin Core terms. If you heard about Darwin Core, that's really what it's about. Each term is has a name and has also a definition that tells what should be there, what should be put in this under this term. And so you can really think of it as normalized column names that allows to everybody to speak the same language. I mean, for example, you can, if I told you that Darwin Core calls the field where you put the collector, the name of the person who collected the occurrence, I can tell you, okay, it comes from it's a Darwin Core terms called recorded by. And so what you will do is tell the IPT, okay, for the Darwin Core term recorded by, so the standard name for the recorder name, the collector name, you will find it in my 6th column here, in the column name collector. And so you do this mapping, that's really where the term Darwin Core mapping is, between a standardized column name, recorded by, and your local column name, which is here, collector. And that's what we'll do for every column that we want to publish, that we want to make available. We will have to tell the IPT in which Darwin Core term, so in which standardized column names it will have to be mapped. So let's go. We will first have a look at the page here. So basically here you always have the name of the Darwin Core terms. You have a lot of them, so it can be a bit overwhelming, but once you get used to do that, you get acquainted, and the most common you will know them by heart, or you will check simply, and that's not as heavy as it seems. And also generally the fields have a name that you can partly guess. I mean, yeah, you can see here a term called family. We can check, but we can probably bet that it will be there to host the name, the family name of the occurrence we're talking about. So yeah, we have for every term, you have the term itself. This is the standardized name. You can get the help to know what should be connected to this term. And then what is really important is this column where you can, if you look at the things there, ID, locality, genus, family, scientific name, collector, you can have a look there. This is our column names. And so you basically do the mapping there. If you say, okay, the dataset name is in my column latitude. Of course, it's not that. I take it just as an example. In front of dataset name, you can just select latitude, and then the IPT will know how to map our local column name to the Darwin Core terms. So that's what we'll do. We have all these terms there. They are organized by category. You have some terms that talk more about the record, about the row itself, like when was it modified the last time, what's the language, if there are some commands, for example, a description, textual description, what's the language of the description, if there's a specific license attached to the record, you can set it there. You can have information about the location of the event, and you have various location-related fields, like on which country code, which locality, the latitude, the longitude, some remarks that are especially remarks about the location, some taxon data related fields, and so on and so on. IPT will help us to do this this job simply by listing at the bottom of the page you have unmapped column, and unmapped columns just list you data columns that are there in your initial file and that are not mapped to any Darwin Core term. So if you publish it like that, all those terms will not be published, will not be made public, which sometimes you want it. I mean, in this example, I have two columns for latitude and for longitude. I have latitude, longitude, blurred latitude, blurred longitude. What I want to show there is that sometimes you can have sensitive data and you don't want to publish everything. And so if you have those two columns, maybe you don't want to publish the real latitude with all the details, because that would give people the exact location of the occurrence, and it can be wrong for the environment, for example. And so you will publish the blurred latitude but not the latitude column. So it's quite normal to have some columns that are not mapped, but you have to map every one that you need. And yeah, I also have something else to show you, is that there's some auto mapping. Here, for example, you can see that in my initial file, I have a column called locality, and if I look in the unmapped column, I cannot see it. Why? Quite simply because the IPT was able to automatically detect it was the locality, and so it mapped it automatically. And how does it do that? That's quite simple, in fact. If I look here in the page, so the first column here, as I said before, is really the Darwin Core, the standardized name. And if you check there's a standardized name called locality, and our column is named locality 2. In that case, if you name your headers in your sheet with Darwin Core terms, it will map it automatically. And you can see it here because in front of the locality term, it's already configured to look for data in the locality column. It's already selected this in this box, and that's what we will do for the other terms. For example, for collector, it was not automatically mapped because there's no in Darwin Core there's no collector field. There's a field to record who's the collector, but it's not named collector. So in that case, the IPT was not able to automatically do this mapping. So we will have to find this this collector term, the term that is made for those kind of data, and manually told it to connect to the collector column. So let's go. Yeah, I can see here, for example, in the unmapped column that collector is still to map. I want to map it because I want to publish this data. I think it's important to put it in the datasets, and it's not. So here you will have to find in this huge list of Darwin Core terms what is the term made to link to the collector of an occurrence. yeah, it's a bit difficult at first to get used to all those terms. But if you do data publishing on a regular basis, you will see that it's quite often the same terms that comes again and again. And so after a few times, you know more or less where to look at, and you're getting faster. So yeah, I'd say just take a few times. The first publishing you'll do, it will be a bit difficult to find the right one, but then it will go faster and faster. And by experience, I can tell you that the field that is made to publish the collector information is called recorded by. I can see it recorded by. We can check. You can click on the help button and look what is it. And yeah, I can read here a list of names of people, groups, or organizations responsible for recording the original occurrence, the primary collector or observer, blah 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 blah. So, and there are examples too, like, and you see name of a few people separated by a vertical line, vertical pipe. So it really seems that it's the right Darwin Core term to map our collector column. So I can do it. I can just take the list here and say, okay, the collector is mapped to the recorded term. And then I can click the save button just to record where I am. So if I lose something, I will not have to configure it again. So click on save. I can go back to recorded by, and I can see it's linked to the collector. And also the IPT shows me some extract from the sheet. It tells me, okay, in this column I find data such as Albert W, Martin Grimm. I can check again, and okay, Albert W, Martin Grimm. So I can see that that's done. The recorded by Darwin Core standard term is linked to our column. So if I go back at the bottom to the list of unmapped column, I have one less, because the collector column that was previously here is now mapped to the recorded by term. So I can see that I have a date column, which is a bit well, yeah, I have a date column here that's not mapped. That's a bit more tricky, because you have several dates in general you can think of when you talk about a record. You can imagine the date it was collected, the date it was identified, the date the data was published. You can have several dates, and here we have a specific date column. We have a generic date column, so it's a bit difficult to know what it is. So that's really the kind of case where you could need to go back to the scientist that gave you the data and say, okay, what is this date? What is it exactly, this date? Because I have to map it differently if it's the date of publishing, or if it's the date of collect, or the date of identification. There are different Darwin Core terms for that, and you only told me it's a date, so I need it. But here we can think. Let's suppose it's the date the occurrence was collected in the field. So we have to find the right Darwin Core field for that. Let me remember. I have something here. I have a field called event date. I will check the definition of this event date to see if it's the right one or not. The date, time, or interval during which an event occurred. For occurrences, this is the date, time when the event was recorded. And you have examples that looks like dates. And I have more details, but basically it seems it's that. So it seems that my date column should be mapped to the event date Darwin Core term. So let's just do it. It's the same as the previous one. I just take this list, select the date column, and they are put in front of each other, they are mapped together. I save the page just to remember the information, and I go back at the bottom of the list to check if it has disappeared from the unmapped columns. Yeah. So I only have 5 remaining unmapped columns here. Blurred longitude, blurred latitude, latitude, longitude. As I said before, this is an example where we'll decide that we don't want to publish the very detailed location, and the IPT will allow you to do that. For example, at this mapping stage, we can decide, okay, we don't map the latitude and longitude column, so they won't appear in the published dataset, but instead we map blurred latitude and blurred longitude. And so we will give some information, but not that much to avoid people with bad intentions to be able to locate the specific organism. So yeah, I already know that the terms I will have to, the columns I will have to map are blur lat and blur long, and that these 2 lat long will stay here as unmapped columns. I can check in my IPT long list of IPT terms. I have those shortcuts here, and I can guess it's probably in the location section. I click on location section, which is just a shortcut for this. And I have a lot of things, but I have, for example, decimal latitude, decimal longitude, which looks like it could be that because our values are decimal. It's not degree, minute, seconds, it's decimal latitude and longitude. So I will just check briefly the definition. Decimal latitude, the geographic latitude in decimal degrees using the special reference system given, and I have an example, -41 point. So it seems to be that. So, whoops, I clicked there, sorry, back to decimal latitude. So in front of decimal latitude, I will not publish my lat column because it has too much detail, I don't want, but I publish the blurred latitude. And then I will also, for longitude, decimal longitude, I will publish blurred longitude. Again, I click on save. Whoops. I don't know if I disconnected it or not. 1 second. Yeah, it's done. You can see latitude, longitude have now disappeared from the unmapped column list. So those 2 lat long, I don't want to publish them, so there's only one field in my file that's not mapped. It's ID, it's called ID. It's the first column here, and I have like a number that seems unique, 0, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it seems like it's really a number that can be used to uniquely identify a row or a specimen here. So it's important. It's really something. Sometimes you will have biodiversity data. You will receive some data in a file like that doesn't have an ID column, and really it should. And the more it's like a good practice in data management in general. And if the IPT, if you use it like we do for simple cases, it can work without an ID per column, but it won't for the most complex cases. It will really need that. So yeah, you should really, if you're creating yourself data or if you're talking to scientists, ask them an ID, a unique ID for each record, for each occurrence, and ask them to apply it as soon as possible. I mean, there's no point if you don't have an ID and you need it to publish. You can invent it at publication time. But if you republish the same data a few months later, you will have to reinvent them. And if the order change, if there are new records in the file, the ID will not be consistent. The occurrence number 3 will maybe become the occurrence number 5. it's not a persistent identifier, and that's not really useful. The real use of this identifier is that it doesn't change. So yeah, you should ask them to put it as soon as possible. I mean, if you're collecting data on the field, you should assign at that exact time, an ID to our record, and later you use it, you propagate it in all your other data, in your sheets, in your database, but you can still go back to this number 3 record. That's really important. And here, yeah, I give it to you, but it's really at the top of the, because it's so important for the IPT that it appears at the top of the list of Darwin Core fields. You have an occurrence ID field, you have a definition, an identifier for the occurrence, blah 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 blah, and that's where you should map any unique identifier you have. Here it's just a simple number. Sometimes you will have more complex numbers like GUUID, globally unique identifiers, but as soon as you have a unique number that identify each record, each occurrence, you should put it here. And so in our case, it's from the ID column. So same principle as the other. I say, okay, the occurrence ID term, it is in the ID column. And I can click one more on the save button. And so here, if I go back one last time here, I could say, okay, everything is mapped from my initial file, except lat long columns, which is normal. I don't want to publish them, so all should be good. Well, not exactly, because if you go back at the top of the page, you see like a warning or error message, and the IPT tells us basis of record is required. So, what is basis of record? Basis of record, you can find it here. You can see it's the column, it's a Darwin Core term. It's in the first column with all Darwin Core terms. And you have a definition, the specific nature of the data record. Recommended best practice is to use the control vocabulary such as the Darwin Core type vocabulary. You have examples: preserved specimens, fossil specimens, human observations, machine observation, living specimen. So you can get an idea of what it is. First, this field is required. The IPT will not accept to publish data if there's not a basis of record field for each record. And this field basically is there to tell if this is an observation, if this is a specimen that is living in a zoo, for example, or that was captured. You really have to, that's really what you have to specify in this field. But here you will see that you have a problem, because if you look at your initial Excel file, you don't have anywhere a column that contains those data. You could imagine having here one more column with observation on each line, with collected specimen, if those specimens were collected and back to a museum, collected specimen for each line, but you don't have it, so you cannot map it. But the IPT wants it. It says, okay, I cannot publish. So you don't know which column to select here, because you don't have any column in your source data to select. So here you have we will see one more feature of the IPT in the mapping section, is that you can see that first column was the Darwin Core term, second is the list of our columns, but there is a third column. And what is it about? If you select a value in this third column, it will apply to all the occurrences. It's just like if you had one more column in your original field with the same value everywhere. And in that case, you don't have to add this column manually in the file before. You can just tell the IPT, okay, Just consider that for every row here, you for this specific field put this static value. I can show you an example somewhere else. For example, the country. We have a country field in the location. Here we don't have any country, so you cannot map a specific column and say look in this column. But imagine all those records were from Belgium, and you want to publish that information. You can simply, because you type here in this third column Belgium, and if you save, you will have a published data with Belgium on each line, just the same as if you'd added a country column name here and added Belgium value for each row, just the same. So let's back to our basis of record. It is the same thing. I have a third column here. But I have something a bit different. I don't have a free text field like I had to type my country name. I have a select list here, and I can choose directly which is the basis of record I want to apply to all those records: fossil specimen, human observations, living specimen, machine observation, material sample, occurrence, preserved specimen. Why do I have this list here instead of the free text field that are on most places? It's because IPT wants you to use a controlled vocabulary to do that. And a controlled vocabulary is just a list, a standardized list of values for those terms. I mean, we already say that Darwin Core terms are standardized, like standardized column names, like say, okay, the scientific name is in the scientific name column. But for example, for those cases, you could imagine that some people, if a specimen is observed, some people will publish as values. So in the other direction, some people will say it's observation, others say it's human observation, etc. So in those cases, the system will not be able to put all together, because you gave different names to the same concept of a specimen that was observed in the field, and so it forces you to use standardized names for that. Like, for example, human observation. And so, as you cannot type a free text, but you have to select in the list, GBIF has the guarantee that all people that want to talk about human observation will have the same human observation value in the field. And that's why it's done. And it's not the only place in the IPT where you have this small dictionary that tells you should use a controlled vocabulary. Yeah, we have a few of that. Taxon rank, you have to, taxon rank, for example, you have genus, form, family, domain, but that's the same ID. You shouldn't invent your own name for a specific rank. You should select a standardized name in the controlled vocabulary list there. So go back one last time to basis of record. Here, if I look at the data, there's a collector, so it seems it was really collected on the field, so the specimen is probably preserved somewhere in a museum. So I will select the value preserved specimen here. I can save one last time. And this time we can see that we have a quite good mapping, I think, because in unmapped columns you only have left columns that you don't want to publish, you don't want to map them. All the others were done either automatically. Yeah, forgot to tell you. We saw that the locality field was mapped automatically because it was named locality, same thing as the Darwin Core term. So automatic mapping, we didn't have to choose here. We have just the same thing for the scientific name. because the Darwin Core term used to store scientific names is simply named scientific name, or column here was named scientific name. So yeah, it's already selected here. Scientific name, Darwin Core term, came from the scientific name column, and we didn't selected it manually, if you remember. So we have a good mapping because we don't have unmapped field other than what we want. We have an ID, we have an identifier, which as said is really something important, and we have a basis of record, because otherwise, if you don't specify a basis of record, either from a column, either from fixed value that we select here, the IPT will not allow publishing. So all that together, I think it's quite a good mapping. I will just save one last time just to be sure, and I can go back to my resource overview page. But now the Darwin Core mapping section is done, so we will go to the next one, which is metadata. So, as discussed before, metadata are extremely important too, because it's basically describing what our dataset is about, what are the access rights, what are the person contacts, what protocols were used. So it really gives context to the future users of your data about what they can expect about it, and so they can use it to assess the fitness for use, because maybe the data will be fine for some use and not for others. I mean, if you don't have you can have a very great taxonomic data, but not excellent locations, not very detailed locations, and it really depends on the kind of analysis that you want to do if the data is fit for use or not. And dataset, adding metadata to your dataset will allow those users to understand and to use it as best. Also, if you give contact information in your metadata, which is extremely important, and they cannot find in the metadata itself the information they want, at least they can find a phone number or an email address and contact you or the original data owner to ask questions. So metadata is extremely important, and you can see a warning sign here in the IPT, and it just says the resource is missing mandatory metadata, because actually the GBIF nor the IPT will accept publishing a resource without any metadata. So I can click edit and we'll have a look. Yep. So metadata are split in several sections, in several pages actually, and you can see the sections here: basic metadata, geographic coverage, taxonomic coverage, project data, citations, external links, and so on and so on. And we are now on the basic metadata page, and that's simply the page that contains all the mandatory metadata. If you fill this page, the IPT will allow you to publish. But I really encourage you to fill as much as possible. If you know something about the geographic coverage, about the taxonomic coverage, if you can ask, if you don't know, but you can easily find the scientist that created the dataset and ask him or her, what is it, the taxonomic coverage? Please do take time to document. Most of the time, the difference between a good, usable dataset and ones that you don't really know if you can use for your research, the difference is sometimes just having enough metadata or not, or good metadata or not. So we'll have a quick overview here. Basic metadata. You first have a dataset title. It's set to the short title we put at the very beginning when we created the resource: brackish-water-fishes-ulb. At the time, we had to put a short name that was very restricted, but here it's more a generic title, so we can be longer and use special characters and so on. So I will just change it to type the same thing, but with proper spelling and so on. So brackish water fishes collection from the ULB, for example. And so I have the short name and I have the same name but with a slightly longer and human readable version here. I have to select a publishing organization. As I said before, you can have an IPT that is publishing data on behalf of several institutions or organizations, and you have here to select the one that you want to use. Here we only have 3. If you want to publish for an organization that doesn't appear here, that's something that should be configured by the person who is the IPT administrator, to first link the IPT to a specific organization, and once it is linked, you will be able, when you publish a resource, to select which organization. So I can select an organization here. We can select the type, but it's forced. It's occurrence type dataset because we already put it. Metadata language, because in the metadata you will have like a text descriptions and things like that, and you can tell in which language this metadata itself is done. Data language, the same, but for the data rows themselves. In our case, it doesn't really apply, but if you had commands for each record, they have to be written in a language, and you can select it. You have to select a data license and to tell how you want to share. If you want, you have 2 Creative Commons licenses and a waiver that is which is CC0, which is a Creative Commons but like for public domain, and you have to choose one of those. So GBIF and your users know what you accept as usage with your data. Those things we will. That's a very interesting topic, but we cannot discuss it at length here. We have description, add a new paragraph. So that's really, you should there put some abstract about what the dataset is about. Yeah, just a few paragraphs saying mostly the general, what you have to say in general. How was it created? What people can expect from it? It's just free text, but please put as much as you can. And then you can add contacts for the resource, and you have a first name, a last name, the home page, the phone number, the email address, things like that. So for the contact for this resource, for this dataset, you have the same thing. Contact person for the creator of the resource, of the dataset, and then for the person who filled metadata. So you need at least 3 person contacts, and you can add more. You can add another metadata provider if you were doing that in a team, for example. You should really put as much information as possible here. So if a user has a question, he can really get in touch with you or your team or your source of data and discuss it. And also, if you have several, at least if one person moved from an institution to another and this email address change and things like that, it's still possible to find the person. So yeah, I'll fill something, because if I don't, I will not be able to publish here. So I put my name, my organization, yeah, and I think that's all that's needed. And I can copy the thing from section to section. If you want to put the same person on the 2 or 3 sections, you don't have to copy paste everything. You can just click on copy details from resource contact, and whoop, magically it will be copied from one to the other. And then I can save the basic metadata section. Please do write better metadata than me. It was just for the example, but there should be at least one good paragraph in the abstract in the description, section, and more detailed contact section. And it's not enough because I didn't selected any data license. I will select public domain CC0, which is really what I recommend for reasons we don't have time to discuss there. Yeah, and my description is too short. I need at least 5 letters, so I will give it a bit more. And I think that's it. I click save again. At least one creator is required. It's just a resource creator. I need, yeah, like I said before, we need three people at least for each dataset: the resource contact, the resource creator, and the metadata provider. And I didn't add anything in the resource creator section, which is why it failed. I can copy it from the other section, save again. And now, yeah, basic metadata section successfully saved. So I have my basic metadata, which means that the IPT will accept now to publish the data, but there are more sections, and you should fill as much as possible and have as good metadata as possible. So we'll make a quick review. The next one is that one is geographic coverage. You should just say what's the area covered by the resource. You can drag a bounding box here on zone, but you can also enter manually the limits of this box as latitude, longitude. You can put a textual description saying, for example, this is for this country, that country, but not that neighboring country for that or that reason. If your dataset is covering the whole world, you can check this and disable the box totally. It's a set global coverage button. You have a taxonomic coverage section when you can add things and say we are describing this family, and this domain and this genus, and you can really add a lot of different ranks and taxonomic description. So you just give the taxonomic areas coverage by the dataset. Temporal coverage, you can add temporal information saying that this was collected if it's an expedition between that day and that day, or all the data from the dataset was collected on a specific day. Yeah, you can see single date, date range, living time period, formation period. You have it really depends on the data. You can associate keywords. You can use a vocabulary and add keywords there that will allow easier searching of the dataset later. Associated parties, you can there give more contact persons. We had 3 required in the basic metadata, but you can have more. You can have, for example, you can add a point of contact or a content provider, an author, a programmer, a curator that's associated to the resource, the dataset. You should add them there, and there will be more data more metadata for the dataset. Project data. It's basically the metadata about the project under which the data and this resource were produced. You can describe that. You can add personnel that were part of this project. Sampling methods. For example, if you're catching insects and you are using a specific kind of trap, you can give more informations there about that. And the citations, you can say, oh, you want your resource to be cited in publications. When people use it, you can add bibliographic citations that were used in your dataset. You can add external links here. For example, if you have a website dedicated to the resource or a web page, you can add it there, and so on and so on. Additional metadata. I think you can add a picture. You can add a logo for the resource. If the project has its own logo, you can add it there, and so on and so on. So all those are the different metadata sections, and please do fill them as good and as fully as possible. That's really important. If you publish data on the GBIF networks, you want people to use it. And if people don't have good metadata, they will have doubts about if they can use it or not, and if the quality is good or not, and all these things. So it's really important. I go back to the resource page, and so yeah, we're progressing well. We already filled the source data, the Darwin Core mapping, and the metadata, which is basically we gave the IPT all the informations needed to publish something. So we arrived to this published version section. I think I said before earlier in this tutorial, publish here in this case doesn't mean publish at GBIF. It means that the data we fill there, the source data, the informations in the mapping and the metadata will be aggregated together and a file will be created. That file is called a Darwin Core archive. It's a standard file done for exchanging biodiversity information. And when I click publish, what will happen is just that. A file will be created aggregating information from the first 3 sections. And I can do that. I can click on publish. It told me I'm about to publish a new major version, and which is normal the first time you publish it, but just still ask confirmation. Do you really want to do that? Do you want to tell a short summary of what happened? This message appears for every major version. So sometimes you will have already a resource and you change something and you want to publish. And so the IPT would like to have a description of what's new here. So just to have a log of the major publishing and why is it. So here as a description, I will just put something like initial release. And I say, yes, I want to publish it. And I have now a publication status page that tells me exactly what happens, and I have a message here because it was really fast. Of course, there's very few data. I have only 7 rows here. If I had thousands or hundreds of thousands of rows, it will be a bit more slower. But it tells me, okay, that is what happened. A lot of technical details that you don't need here. You need them in case of problem, basically. And it says, okay, publishing a version 1 of resource brackish water fishes ULB finished successfully. So I have a published version, which means that the IPT now it has and it hosts a file containing all our data. It's not shared with GBIF. It's not public yet. But there's a Darwin Core archive standard file which is hosted by this IPT and that contains all this. I can see here a few things like this is the version 1.0 about my archive, my published version, because you can publish several times, of course. For example, you could imagine that you publish that and then you realize that the metadata is not great and you have more information a few weeks later. You can add things in the metadata, or you can receive a new files with more rows here because the project has evolved and you can load it there. But each time you change anything in those first 3 sections, that should be reflected in the published archive. So after, you will have to click publish again, and you will have a new version of the Darwin Core archive that is published, that is created. That's all basically for this section. You also have an auto-publishing feature that is used, for example, to tell the IPT, okay, I want each month you will auto-publish a new version. But it's more when you connect it to a database, because here, if you change something in the source data or Darwin Core mappings or metadata section, you know you changed it, so you can publish it directly. But if the IPT is not connected to an Excel sheet, but to an external database that changed by itself because it's connected to a different system, if you are in such complex cases, maybe the data is evolving all the time, and every day there are new records. And so in those cases, it can be quite useful to tell the IPT, okay, I want you every week to create a new published version of my dataset, my resource. And that's why this button is here, but you don't really need it for simple cases. So that's it for published versions, and we are almost there. Now you have the visibility section, and it says it's private. What is it? As we just discussed, the published versions is not published at GBIF. There's a Darwin Core archive file which is published, and that is ready to. It is hosted by the IPT, which is a server. I remember you, and so the IPT can share that file with GBIF or with the world in general, but it's not done, and so you do it here. Visibility private, which is the default state when you create a new dataset. It means that you need to be connected to this IPT to see the resource. In fact, I can show you if I log out of the IPT. I go back to the main public page of the IPT that everybody will see if he has the address of your IPT. And I still have some resources here, that hosted resources available through this IPT. And you can see that our resource doesn't appear at all. Why? Because it's private. So if you're not connected, if you're not a data manager connected to the IPT, you will not see it. I log in again. I go to the Manage Resource page, and here I can see brackish water fishes collection from the ULB. It appears there, but it's not on the public page because if you're not an administrator, you cannot see it. So that's what private means. And now you have a public button. Yeah, I have a help there. You have a help inline that says exactly what I said. This resource is private to managers. To make this resource available to everyone, please make it public. So we can click on the public button. Change visibility status to public. I can see here the visibility is public. And I can, if you go back to the home page of the IPT now, you should see, no, it's not, okay, sorry, it's not yet there. Visibility public, and I have two buttons there now. I have one private. I will put it back in the previous state. So yeah, public doesn't mean yet it's in the GBIF network. It just means that if you know the address of the resource of the IPT, you can have access to it. So the data is available to the world, but they have to know the address of the IPT directly and to connect it directly. It will not appear in a network like GBIF. It will not be searchable from the GBIF portal. And doing that is a third step in visibility, and is registering the dataset with GBIF. And I have a register button here that is used exactly for that. However, it's not available because, yeah, it tells me why. I have this message, and it said, okay, this resource cannot be registered because the current published version is not publicly available. And this is because we published here on the previous section before we set the visibility to public. And there's a technical limitation there. So we have to publish again a new version. It will be the same content because we didn't change anything there, but at least it will be made public directly at publication, and so it will work better. So I can click publish again. I still need an error log message. I say okay. First public release. This time that's why I republish. I put that in the log, click on yes. Publishing version 1.1 of resource brackish water fishes ULB finished successfully. So it's done. I can go back there, and now the register button is available. So if I click on it, it just asks me confirmation, and I can say, okay, I understand the GBIF data sharing agreement, which is the document that tells us what is data sharing at GBIF and what it implies. If you confirm that you read it and that you understand and that you still want to publish your data at GBIF, you can just click yes, and it will be done. So visibility registered, and now I can say in the message, this public resource is registered with GBIF, meaning that it's globally discoverable via the GBIF website. And I have an identifier for my resource, which has been created, and so on and so on. So now the resource is published at GBIF. As we said before, we are on a specific IPT instance, which is a test one, so we can safely publish without polluting the GBIF pool of real-world good quality data. So that's why I was able to do that. Please, if you do the same, use an IPT in test mode. And now I should be able to show the results on a test version of the IPT global portal, if everything went well. So you will check just that. Just 1 second. And go to this portal, which is, it's not the real one, it's the test version that is connected to this test IPT. And I have 15,000 and a few more datasets. And I can try to search for brackish, for example. And I have a dataset called brackish water fishes collection from the ULB that looks exactly just like we published. And if I go on the page, on the portal, I can see it's published by test organization number 1. That's what we selected in our metadata. I have my very short description. I have my title, language of metadata English. Technical contact, it's me. So what I put there, I have a link to the IPT instance that was used to publish it. I have a link to the Darwin Core archive file that has been created by the IPT and used to exchange that. I can see the detailed metadata and so on and so on. The only thing is that the GBIF portal told me there are 0 occurrences in this dataset, which isn't right, because we should have 7 lines, so we should have 7 records and we should be able to see them from there. But there's a small delay. In fact, when you publish data at GBIF, the metadata and the dataset is created automatically, as you just see, but you sometimes need a couple of hours or a couple of days before the data is indexed and really appear in the portal. So we should check in a few hours, and the data should be there now if everything went well. So we'll go back one last time on our resource metadata page, but basically resource overview page, but basically we did everything. We configured all that, we published a version, we made it public, and then we registered it with the GBIF network. The only last section here is resource managers, and it's used to give powers to other users. For example, let's say you created the resource, you did all that, but it's one of your colleagues that should update it on a regular basis. If this person has an account on the IPT, you can just select the name of your colleague here, click add, and this person will have the rights to administer the resource, which means when he or she connects on the IPT in manage resource, he will see and he will be able to administer brackish water fishes collections from the ULB like here, just like we did. So basically that's it for this tutorial. I hope it wasn't too long and too technical. Don't hesitate to discuss anything that you'd like, preferably on the GBIF community site. The address is back on the screen now. And otherwise, we will see each other in a few weeks for the second part on the tutorial in the Nodes training meeting in Madagascar. Thank you very much.